Hi, I wanted to give you an update, and I also wanted to talk about a few random things. Part of this video could be considered a video response to a video that was produced by Rick from the 28mm RPG channel. The link to that video will be in the description of this video. But first, let me give you the update. I'm going to continue with my channel presenting reviews for various themes and styles of role-playing games. I want my channel to have that sort of miscellaneous nature to it. I don't want to specialize on a single thing, so I will continue with that. And maybe you have noticed that in my community posts, I am going to be putting some interesting links there that are usually banned or shadow banned by YouTube. Remember, all of that is going to be science fiction, because I think that the tyrants of this world are kind of like stepping up in their agenda to do all sorts of evil things. And people need to know. They need to be well informed to know how to protect themselves and their loved ones, and just have an awareness, because if you want to harm your enemies, you want to keep them in ignorance. So I think people should always be aware of what is going on, and most importantly, verify things for themselves, because only a brainwashed fool is going to believe what the mainstream says without carrying out this scientific method. Find out the truth for yourself. Don't let anyone, videos or anything that you read, tell you how things are. Always verify things for yourself. Use logic and reasoning. The scientific method, most importantly. So yes, I will continue with all of that. Now, moving on, like I said, I saw this video from Rick, and I agree with everything that he says when it comes to role-playing, because he critiques a video that was, it's basically a session, a role-playing game session by RPG Musings. Now, RPG Musings, I've only interacted with him once, and I got the impression that he's quite classy and witty. That is, I think he's a good guy, based on my superficial impression. So, despite that, yes, that video, that session is lacking in certain ways. Like I said, watch Rick's video. He pretty much points out everything that is wrong with that session. But this got me thinking about several things, and I thought, wow, there is a certain similarity when it comes to role-playing games and martial arts. I would call it the McDojo connection. Because maybe some of you are familiar with the term McDojo. These are usually centers of training that are very superficial. They teach you martial arts the wrong way. They are mostly there to, sort of like a franchise, kind of like, yes, like a typical fast food franchise. They have these different dojos, and they supposedly train you in martial arts, but they are there to feed the ego of the person. They are not being actually taught a real life self-defense method. They are teaching martial arts as a sport. But remember, martial arts, they are used for, well, to put it quite bluntly, they are there to kill your enemy. You could decorate it however you like. But the reason why many military and paramilitary groups learn martial arts is because they want to eliminate the threat. So in those dojos, they don't teach you how to do that. And I started to think, well, there is some similarity with role-playing games. So first I want to, although this seems like a bit like a tangent, I want to tell you what I think about that incorrect method of teaching martial arts. In the McDojos, like I said, they are going to teach you some martial arts forms, but without understanding what the purpose of those forms are. Like I've said in other videos, many movements that look like blocking and sometimes parrying. Parrying is also always great, but there are some blocks that feel so clumsy, so mechanical. There are also some hand and leg strikes that seem perhaps nonsensical. And it is because they connect to other things, such as grappling. A lot of, for example, karate blocks are mostly there to rather break the hold that your enemy has upon you. If they take your arm or your lapel or something, those blocks are actually methods of striking the arms of the opponent. That's why they look so robotical, you know. But it is actually because imagine someone is taking your hand, or your wrist rather, and when you do this, you're basically like hitting or striking the hand away. So those are things that are ignored. In other cases, you are grappling the opponent. Many movements, for example, in Vajikwan or karate, in Kempo, you see these practitioners constantly pulling their hands, and that's because they have captured the arm of the opponent and then they strike. It's kind of like putting a bit more oomph into the hit, because you are taking the arm of the opponent, you are pulling the opponent towards you, and then you strike. So you can imagine it's kind of like stabbing the opponent usually in the solar plexus or the stomach. So those are with your fist. Those are the things that are usually not well taught in McDojos. So the person, the so-called martial artist, starts to advance, but they are at a very inferior level, especially when it comes to fitness. The typical fat kid that is promoted to black belt, and that kid is so obese and he cannot last 15 seconds without almost fainting, passing out from the exertion when in a real combat situation. So the same thing happens with role-playing games. You are being taught how to play role-playing games in the incorrect way, because I've mentioned this I'm going to put a playlist in the description where I talk about role-playing games tips and advice, and in my video of Crouching Gygax Hidden Arneson, Dave Arneson, in my opinion, of course I never knew Dave, but in my opinion, based on what I have heard and read, he really knew how to play a role-playing game. But when Gygax created Dungeons and Dragons, Gygax was great when it comes to structuring the rule set, but I think he never really grasped the concept of role-playing that Dave Arneson practiced or took to the practice. And so, like I said, watch that video if you want more information about that. So many people learn the Gygaxian way of running role-playing games. And so later on in life, they continue, perhaps decades, and because there is no reference on how to play a role-playing game in what you could say the correct way, they think that they are they are playing the right way. And this got me thinking about martial arts again, because in martial arts, you see those people coming out of the McDojo, and they are, oh, I'm a black belt, I know how to fight. And when they get into a real dangerous situation, they cannot do anything, because they have not developed the mindset nor the techniques to actually survive a life or death confrontation. Sometimes it ends terribly for them. And although those cases are not as extreme in tabletop role-playing games, when they actually play with a real role player, they may feel inadequate. In the worst cases, they develop some sort of hubris, in which they think that they know everything, that they are doing the correct thing, but at the same time, they think that other people that play differently from them, they are inferior in their role-playing style. Now this takes us to Rick's video. Like I said, Dungeon Musings, he is a nice guy, but yes, his way of playing role-playing games, I would personally say that it is quite lacking, which is a shame. There are some moments in that session that you can see he's trying to inject some sort of wit into the session, but because he has been taught in a terrible way, or he never tried to learn past that incorrect way of attempting to play a role-playing game, the session is quite lacking. And just like a so-called martial artist that only trains in the McDojo with other McDojo trainees, that they fight at a very inferior level. They move so sluggish, so slow, with no potency. They are almost passing out because they are out of breath, because they are so obese, or in the case that they are so skinny because they haven't taken the appropriate nutrients. Terrible. The same thing happens with so-called role players, because they are only playing with their circle of friends that have never gone past that incorrect way of playing. Perhaps you could say it's sort of like a circle jerk, where they are just patting each other's back because, oh, you're a great role player, great, but all of those people, they do not know how to play a role-playing game adequately. They have no reference. Imagine that someone is living in a cave, and caves are always used in psychology, right? But imagine someone in a cave, and there is just this little glimpse, this tiny light where the sun shines through. They think that is the most radiant thing that they have seen in their lives. They have never stepped out of the cave. But when they step out of the cave, they see the sun, and they're like, wow, that thing is so blinding, and it feels so warm. It's the same thing. The same thing with role-playing games. When they actually grasp the concept of getting immersed, really playing a role-playing game through the description of what their characters are doing, eliminating those unnecessary questions, it's a whole nother thing entirely. Another thing entirely, sorry. Perhaps there is a fear of immersion. Like me, with many things in life, when you are not accustomed or adjusted to something, you feel awkward, uncomfortable, unprepared. For example, maybe someone is being taught how to dive, scuba diving. Maybe someone is being taught how to climb. Even riding a bicycle, the first time that you attempt any of those things, it can be a bit scary. But the trick to getting adjusted to any of those activities is to keep doing those activities. And I think this also happens with many so-called role players, or people that play role-playing games in general. They start to try to get immersed because it can be quite scary for them to suddenly abandon this physical awareness and really get into their character. They probably feel as if they are trapped in their character and they want to get out. So imagine maybe there is a player that is going to play your typical Dungeons and Dragons role-playing game, and he's like, my character starts to move through the entryway, and the game master describes, you enter the cave, and there is a single wooden box in the middle of the room. And he's like, now he's terrified. What is inside that box? Is it a trap? Is it an illusion? He wants to jump out of his character. He wants to escape the immersion, the fiction. And now he starts, can I use this spell on this box? Or even more blatantly, what is inside the box? Or can my character use this tool to poke the box? Because he's so terrified of being there. It's even greater than virtual reality. Once you get immersed into the session, it feels as if you are actually there. And this also applies to the game master. So even in that case, the player should have been brave to continue with the immersion. Nothing is going to happen to you if you keep inside your character's persona. You could say, if you are bold, well, I approach the box and start to open it. Or if you want to be a bit more cautious, I take a rock and I throw it at the box. As simple as that. So I think there is a great fear of immersion. I think this fear also has to do with failure. And you could say that is tied again to arrogance. It's okay to make mistakes. Don't feel foolish as long as you are immersed. Maybe the player wants to finish the adventure quite quickly, and I would say you're not experiencing the pleasure of playing a role-playing game like that. Maybe the guy becomes annoyed or fed up with trying to come up with a logical or reasonable way of describing the actions of his or her character, and immediately jumps to the asking questions. Can my character do this? Can I attempt to do this other thing? Because the player wants to move the adventure forward immediately. No, you just need to, I would say, just enjoy the moment. If you attempt something and that thing doesn't work, it happens. If you are making slow progress, you are living the adventure. You are enjoying the sights, the sounds, the textures of that place. It's almost magical. I think some would consider it magical. So yes, going back to the example, Rick gives some very clear advice on how to handle situations. If you want to know more details about whatever it is that you find in the game world, pick up the object, examine it, or start walking around the object, see what is behind. In the case of that box, how it looks from behind. If you need more information, either interact with the game world or ask the non-player character in that scene. Maybe there is some sort of creature there. Maybe in the case of the cave and the box, you see like this small gnome that was in the corner of the cave, and he's just staring at you. You can ask him, what's your name? What is this box? What are you doing here? And you're going to obtain that information through roleplay, while fostering or promoting actual roleplay, not asking questions and all of that. Now, moving on to exposition and narration. Yes, in the case of Dungeon Musing's video, he's running an adventure module from a book. At least that's what I think. But there is a certain disconnection when it comes to some role-playing games and their modules. For example, in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, there are actually some really good modules for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. You can think whatever you like of the fan base and the Wizards of the Coast and yeah, you know. But those modules are actually really good. But I have seen players that criticize those modules or some aspects of that module because they don't have everything delivered to them on a silver platter. For example, Curse of Strahd. That's a great module. There are some, I think they inserted some of their politics there. I need to compare it with the other versions, but in general the module is really good. But I've seen players complaining that, I don't know where my character needs to go, or this module is terrible because they are basically railroading you. And no, it doesn't actually railroad you. You can go wherever you like in the module. You have that freedom, that agency to go wherever you like. In fact, depending on your choices, you may end up going to places that have nothing to do with the starting point. There is like an introductory section for that module just to get your characters up to level 3. But after that, you're on your own. And because players have not been taught that there is actually freedom in role-playing games, it's not like an amusement park ride where you are going on rails and just making the rolls when the game master tells you. That is very passive. The game master is not going to dictate the pace of the adventure. The game master is going to present the situation and the players are going to interact with that situation and they are going to be moving the adventure along. Players have gotten into this passive way of playing or attempting to play. Like I said, a fear of immersion. Jump into the game world, dive into the game world and interact with anything there. The people, the places, the objects. Talk to the non-player characters, explore, manipulate the objects. It's an entire world just for you. And you don't die in real life. That's the greatest thing about role-playing games. You can do whatever you like. Your character is the only one at risk, not you. So yes. Now when it comes to exposition and narration, I think a good idea to look at exposition and narration is to think of it as giving the players tools. In the case of Dungeon Musings, he is reading the entire module, the entire paragraph, the huge paragraph, giving so many details that the players, as pointed out by Rick, they should become knowledgeable about these things or find out about these things because they interact with the game world by using the computer to scan for information, or perhaps they are, who knows, depending on the role-playing game, reading a book, talking to a non-player character, or if it's some sort of player character knowledge, depending on the system. Maybe you make some sort of knowledge check. Oh, and the game master, oh, you recall that that place is actually inhabited by this or that. So you discover things through gameplay. The way that you are carrying out your exposition in the correct way should be that you provide enough tools for the players to actually play. In the case of, yes, Dungeon Musings, you can see that he reads so much. It's kind of like a storytelling session, and it's not so much a role-playing game. Only at certain moments it kind of approaches that. But when you are running an adventure, for example, from a module or something that you have written yourself, or if you are describing things in an improvisational way, there is a certain rhythm to things. Something like blah 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 blah. Now you gave those lines of information for the player characters to act. Now the player characters, my character is going to do this, or I want to do this, I want to use that, I want to, and then the game master responds with the results of those actions and continues with a bit more if he needs to hand out more information or communicate something to the players, blah 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 blah. And then he waits for the players to come up with their input. I think that a good exercise to see if someone is a real role player is to surprise them, perhaps during session 0 or before that. Tell them something like, okay, roleplay as you would roleplay your player character. And you know that you have a good player in your hands if the player says something like, I open the door to the cabin and I draw out my sword. And that's it. And that the game master, you see that the cabin is much larger than it appears from outside. Perhaps it's a pocket dimension effect. And there is a weapons rack at the northwest corner of the room. And you see, or a game master could also be put under the test. If you want to see if a game master is actually a role player, you can tell him like, roleplay any scene that you want. Your characters are standing in front of the ziggurat. There is a strange storm in the sky. Purple lightning can be seen, but everything else is quiet. You suddenly catch the glimpse of a shadowy figure moving through the entrance of the ziggurat. You see? So it's all about that. You are providing tools. The game master is giving tools through his narration for the players to interact. The players are also providing their own tools by stating their actions, their attempts. The game master takes those actions, perhaps those checks in case it's not an automatic thing, and describes what happens. And like I said, you can add further details during that process, but there needs to be that rhythm of blah, blah game master, blah 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 blah, players, blah 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 blah, game master, blah 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 blah, and that way everyone is engaged. You can see in those sessions, those YouTube sessions, so many of the players are falling asleep because the game master is reading a story. It kind of looks like it's the game master, he or she is reading a bedtime story, and the players are kind of like asleep and or fooling around. That's why they make jokes. Perhaps they joke around and fool around so much to see if they can keep awake. So there needs to be that rhythm. Well, thank you for watching this video. I hope it was entertaining and potentially informative. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. Definitely check out Rick's video. The link, once again, is in the description. And thank you so much to those of you that are going the extra mile to support the channel. If anyone else wishes to further support the channel, the information on how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you, and see you later.